Donald Trump thinks the economy is going really, really great.
I do want to talk about the economy, sir, here at home, and I wonder what grade you would give
A plus.
A plus.
Yeah, A plus, 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 plus.
Yeah, as a college professor, that wouldn't be my grade. In the real world, more than 2/3 of Americans, 68%, say economic conditions are getting worse in America. And after tomorrow, about 20 million Americans will see their health insurance costs spike when Affordable Care Act subsidies expire. That includes Trump supporters and former leaders of his coalition. In a new interview out this week, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, the former MAGA firebrand, told the New York Times about one moment that inspired her to break with Trump. It was when, quote, her 2 adult daughters informed her that their health insurance premiums would double.
The president needs to be aware that he's a billionaire, president of the United States, and you can't gaslight people and tell them that their bills are affordable. And you can't tell them that the economy is an A plus, plus, plus. You just can't do that.
Charlie Dent is a former Republican congressman of Pennsylvania. Tara Setmeyer worked as a GOP spokesperson on Capitol Hill and is now the co-founder and CEO of the Seneca Project. They join me now. Thank you all so much. Congresswoman, we'll start with you. So here's the thing. I've always believed, and I've posited this theory for years, that you get the best indicator about the economy after the holidays, right? You find out who came home for Thanksgiving, how many gifts were under the tree at Christmas, who couldn't come home because they couldn't afford it this year. That's really where you get a sense of where the American economy is. And it seems like this year people were tightening their belts. Do the Republicans only take their clues from Donald Trump, who's nowhere near regular Americans? Or do you think they're out in the country, in the nation, hearing people say, yeah, this year I couldn't get a new PS5 for my kid because we had to tighten our belts because we don't know what our finances are going to be like?
No, I actually think that most Republican members of Congress understand that Americans are struggling with a high cost of housing, high cost of groceries, high cost of electricity, high cost of, Christmas presents. Yeah, I think that they get it. The question is, what do you do about it? And I think that's where the problem has been. I think there should have been more pushback on issues like tariffs that have raised prices. That have raised costs for a lot of Americans. That's something Congress could do, but they haven't done anything. But I think they totally understand the dynamic that many Americans are facing, and I think right now they're at a loss too, particularly on health care. They're stuck. They can't come to consensus about how to address health care costs, other than the handful that signed the discharge petition who want to allow the premium subsidies to be extended.
Tara, I'm a political scientist and a bit of a historian. It seems like there are a number of Republican presidents who sort of stepped in this sort of economic blindness mess, right? We've got the George Bush, whether or not he could understand the price of bread or how the cash register worked. He just seemed like he wasn't connected to regular people. It was almost 30 years ago. Then you had Mitt Romney saying, hey, $10,000 bet, right, when people were having difficulty with their mortgages. What does it do to the Republican brand that you have a president who's putting $300 million extensions on the White House that we pay for, and at the same time pretending that people aren't struggling in the America that he is supposedly making better?
Well, I would say that Donald Trump has destroyed the Republican brand through and through and corrupted it in ways that have made it unrecognizable. I think a lot of us would long for the days when George H.W. Bush didn't know the price of milk. I mean, my gosh, what the pearl clutching was like then compared to this now. I mean, Donald Trump has never cared about the average American. He doesn't give a damn about anyone but himself. And his second term in his presidency has been one betrayal after the other for not only average everyday Americans, but his people, the people that voted for him. He betrayed farmers. He's betrayed military families and veterans. He's betrayed small business owners and blue collar workers, and all while enriching himself and completely abusing the American taxpayers' money. You've got people, billionaires in his cabinet. You have tens of billions of dollars being wasted on bombing Venezuela or giving money to farmers in Argentina when we have record numbers of farmers in America filing for bankruptcy on Donald Trump's watch. This has nothing to do with the previous administration. This has to do with what Donald Trump is doing now. The tariffs are taxes on the American people. And so he has done nothing but betray all of these people while his net worth has gone up, what, $3 billion plus? Same thing with his family and his friends around him. So the Republican brand now is a brand of elites who are out of touch, who don't give a damn about the average person, who would much rather continue to go along with what Donald Trump wants to do. And apparently it's not America first anymore. It's not about free markets. It's not about fiscal responsibility. It's this absolute chaos that Donald Trump has wreaked on the American people and our government and our daily lives. While people suffer, he's enriching himself and he's completely aloof. That's the Republican brand now, which is going to be very difficult for them in 2026 to justify.
Congressman, with that in mind, I want to look at this sort of new story. More than half of the ACA marketplace enrollees in America live in Republican congressional districts, right? And with tons of people, 20 million Americans, subsidies and healthcare costs jumping in the next 48 hours or so. My question for you is, where are the answers going to come from? Because it doesn't seem like Speaker Johnson is going to put any effort into extending these subsidies. It's not like it's going to go anywhere in the Senate. So what is the answer? Is there any answer that Republicans who are home right now in their districts are giving people? Or are they just going to go duck for cover on January 1st when everybody in their local districts is running around with pitchforks?
I think the smart Republicans understand that even if Republicans got what they wanted on health care, association health plans, health savings accounts, and other ideas that really are, frankly, about 20 years old now, if they got their way on that, let's assume they all got signed into law, which they're not. But if they did, they would still have to extend the current subsidies because it would take a long time to stand up those programs. So the smart ones understand they have to do something. And also, we should know, too, that in Red America, especially, many states did not expand Medicaid under ACA or under Obamacare. And those folks, since the changes were made through the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill, many people have been moved off of Medicaid. And they're not going to be able to go in, so they're going to be going into the exchanges. So there's more pressure on those red states on the exchanges. More people are in it because they never expanded Medicaid. So that's a big problem. And so they're going to feel it especially hard. So I do think at the end of the day, Republicans are going to be forced to extend the current subsidies, whether they like it or not.
Tara, following up on this, Financial Times has a great story about how U.S. nonprofits are slashing jobs as government and donor funding dries up. Now, the bigger issue to this is that everything from Meals on Wheels to all sorts of programs that many states, red, blue, purple, depend on, are subsidized by federal government grants. The people who fall through the cracks of our healthcare system often receive assistance from nonprofits in the Carolinas and Arizona and everything else like that. Just speak quickly to how dangerous it is that this government has cut back this federal funding at this time of year, especially when people are going to be suffering very quickly.
It's going to cost lives. And we're already seeing the impacts of this, not only domestically, but internationally. And you know who you can thank for that? You can thank Donald Trump for appointing Elon Musk coming in with Doge in the beginning of the year and taking a literal chainsaw to a lot of these programs unnecessarily. Completely unnecessary. People are suffering. Americans are suffering right now because of decisions that Donald Trump made, policies that Donald Trump implemented. This is on him. For the amount of money that they're spending, they have no problem spending $172 million on 2 brand new private jets for Kristi Noem to fly around the country and play Ice Barbie. They have no problem spending millions of dollars on armored BMWs so Kash Patel can cosplay as tough guy FBI director. They have no problem spending money on Tomahawk missiles to blow up fishermen in Venezuela on some BS, excuse for, narco trafficking, which you all know is not true. So this whole idea that it was about fiscal responsibility, that the American people have to go through this pain, is BS. And the American people are going to know that, and especially in 2026, because it will be a campaign issue. It did not have to be this way.
Charlie Dent and Tara Setmayer, thank you so much for joining us this evening on All In.
We begin tonight with a major problem that could cost Donald Trump and the Republicans the midterm elections. At the Kennedy Center, the traditional New Year's Eve concert has been canceled. As you know, the administration unilaterally renamed the Kennedy Center to include Donald Trump's name, a move that lawmakers say was patently illegal. And some musicians have taken the president's actions to heart, refusing to perform at the storied venue. For some, it is a matter of principle over profit. As one musician put it, quote, "Losing my integrity would cost me more than any paycheck." Self-indulgent vanity projects, though, have preoccupied this president in his second term, and the Kennedy Center is merely the latest example of the president's edifice complex. His obsession with the trappings of autocratic grandeur extends to various White House projects, ranging from the mundane, like gilding the Oval Office and remodeling the Lincoln bathroom in marble, to the absolutely outrageous, like paving over the Rose Garden and demolishing the East Wing to make way for a $400 million ballroom. And the president's DIY tendencies haven't been confined to the White House. Trump has festooned multiple government buildings with enormous banners bearing the image of his own face. And in his free time, Trump golfs or attends lavish parties at his Florida beach club Mar-a-Lago. And that tone-deaf behavior is setting off alarm bells. Take a listen.
His obsession with those kinds of issues actually are a political problem for him. I mean, people are sitting around and thinking about how they're going to pay their bills, and he seems obsessed with gold and putting his name on things and remodeling buildings and rebuilding monuments to himself. And I think this is a huge political problem for him. It's a symbol of his distraction. It's the Marie Antoinette thing that he's got going. He's not on the ballot in next November, but Republicans should be really concerned about what they're seeing.
And Republicans are concerned. Some are still upset about the president's unwillingness to negotiate with Democrats during the government shutdown. And as all of this percolates, there is more potentially damaging information from the Epstein files that is coming out regularly. And many Republicans are distancing themselves from the president ahead of the midterms, while others are leaving Congress entirely. Most notably, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Once a stalwart Trump ally, Greene now says she was, quote, naive for believing in the president's promises. Those kinds of schisms seem likely to widen as Trump continues to ignore serious domestic issues and as the midterms draw closer. As The Atlantic puts it, quote, Trump is suddenly looking a lot smaller. Joining me now to discuss all of this is former Ohio Governor John Kasich, a Republican who notably endorsed Joe Biden in the 2020 election. Also with us is Margaret Carlson, editor-at-large with Semaphore. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Governor, let's kick it off. Is the Trump fever in your party finally breaking?
Well, I think that the Trump fever in our country is kind of breaking a little bit. But, what Mark Twain said, reports of my death are greatly exaggerated. And I think some of that is true when it comes to Trump. He still commands a lot in the party. But as time goes on, as the economy doesn't recover, as we see healthcare costs increase, when we see these terrible ICE detained strategy here, where they're like yanking people out of places who are never done anything, commit a crime in the United States. I think there are Republicans who are beginning to say enough. And remember, everybody who runs for re-election, they can't run on Trump. They have to run on the basis of can they win again, and they got to pick their issues. And that's why you're seeing some things break here. But we're still a long way off from seeing a complete shattering of MAGA.
All right, Margaret, a mixed diagnosis from the governor, but Democrats are feeling pretty bullish about their chances in 2026. Take a listen to Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi.
So if the Democrats win the House back?
No. When? When the Democrats win the House back, then we will. Right now, the Republicans in the Congress have abolished the Congress. They just do what the president insists that they do. That will be over.
So that ends as soon as you have a Democrat.
That ends as soon as we have the gavel.
Not if, when. What's your reaction, Margaret? Is she being too optimistic? Are the Dems spiking the football too early?
We miss her certainty, and we miss Congressman Kasich. There's still a budget waiting to be balanced here, Congressman. If you ever want to come back, there's been Abigail Spanberger, Mikey Sherrill. There was just a mayor elected in Miami, the first Democrat in 28 years. These are all good signs for the midterms. And I think some of the issues that you mentioned, Melissa, are ones that everybody understands, that he treats the White House like he owns it. At the very least, he owns it. Or he bought it to renovate it, and he's making excuses about the West Wing. Well, the law says you need to have permission to build, but it didn't say anything about tearing it down. I mean, these excuses to when you go past it, Melissa, it's just shocking to see. And you brought up the Kennedy Center. He said he was, quote, surprised and honored by having the center named after him. After he filled the board fired everybody, filled the board with his cronies, and then had a vote. And by the way, it took minutes to get those letters up on the Kennedy Center. And so now it's the Trump and Kennedy. It's kind of astonishing. And the Oval Office, of course, looks like he's decorating that like an Atlantic City casino, and then putting his predecessor's pictures on the wall with plaques underneath insulting each of them, except for Ronald Reagan. It's kind of astounding, and I think it does penetrate in a way sometimes that the cost of living index doesn't.
Well, so Governor, the behavior is certainly outrageous, as Margaret has detailed. Are the Republicans going to pay a price for the president's behavior? Are they courting a midterm shellacking like the one the Democrats experienced in 2010?
Yeah, I've been saying for quite a while, not just in the last couple of weeks, and Margaret was saying this as well. I thought the Democrats were going to win the House a long time ago. Now, when you take a look at these two ladies who won the governor's races, they were talking about affordability. They were not on fringe issues. The Democrats have a challenge, and that is to stick on things like health care, like the economy. But don't be getting on these fringe issues. They can talk about ICE and the fact that ICE has been too aggressive. I think that resonates with people. But if they start drifting into the fringe issues, they're going to have a problem. For the Republicans, they're sort of stuck with this MAGA thing. And I've been a Republican all of my life, an American first, a Republican second. But I have to tell you, I don't quite know what it's all about. I don't know what's the positive message there. It seems as though it's a message about tearing things down rather than building things up. And that is never a successful way to get elected, to be just so negative and everything. So I think the Democrats are going to win the House, maybe by a significant margin, but they better be careful because they're very good at snatching victory out of the jaws of defeat. Or maybe I said it the wrong way, but I think you know what I'm trying to say. Don't screw the thing up if you want to win.
Yeah, the bottom line is pretty straightforward. Margaret, any path to taking back the House runs through ballot boxes in localities, and the Democrats are worried that the president might try to influence voter turnout in the midterms by doing things like sending in the National Guard or ICE agents to poll sites, which would suppress voter turnout, certainly among some communities. Is that a real concern, and how should it be addressed? What should the Democrats be doing?
I mean, of course he'll try to do that. And, if he doesn't get it done ahead of time, he'll do it after, just the way he did in the presidential by charging voter fraud, et cetera, et cetera. He wants to get rid of mail-in ballots. He doesn't want to get rid of them, but he wants not to have them count if they're not in by the second the polls close. He has all kinds of picayune ways he's going after states' rules on elections, which, by the way, those belong to the states, not to him. He will do anything he can to not make every vote count. Democracy, every vote counts. In Trump land, no, only his votes count.
So, Governor, Margaret's made a great point. There are real midterm insecurities in the White House, and they've already prompted the White House to take some extraordinary steps. There is ongoing a major mid-cycle redistricting fight that the Supreme Court has essentially blessed by blessing Texas's redistricted map. And there's real concern that the president might not accept the results of an election that doesn't break his way. Is there anyone around him in this White House who could rein in those impulses and bring some order to all of this?
Well, maybe Susie Wiles. I mean, it was a pretty astounding interview she gave, and the president supported her, which was sort of surprising. Maybe she seems to be someone there that people are inside the White House are intimidated by, and also somebody who seems to have great common sense. So I think at the end, as Margaret was just saying, these elections that are coming up, they're decided state by state. It's a little bit different than when we saw the presidential election, which, by the way, he won this one and clearly lost the last one. I mean, my sense of this is that the redistricting and all that is just not going to be enough. If the Democrats stay on the right issue, this redistricting is not going to get it done. And by the way, how about Indiana that said we are not, the Indiana style is not to do partisan anything. It's designed to have fair play. So I just don't think the redistricting will really change the outcome here.
Congressman, another area where there's a lack of transparency from the administration is the ongoing military efforts in Venezuela. Very little information officially has been disclosed, albeit the president was rambling in a radio interview and said that America hit some sort of facility on Venezuelan land. The New York Times is reporting there was actually a CIA covert operation.
Not very covert.
Not very covert if it was like that. But it goes to two things. Number one, you hear CIA covert operations in Latin America and all the horrors of El Salvador and Nicaragua that happened in the 80s just come to the forefront of the mind, and that's just, you don't want to go in that direction. But number two, there is no authorization for the use of military force for the United States to operate a land war in Venezuela. What does the Congress know? When will the Congress be better informed? And at what point is this an illegal war?
Well, it's illegal now. I mean, and first, let's be clear. I mean, the last brief that Congress received on just what's happening in Venezuela in its totality was a couple of weeks ago, let alone on what just happened and this ground attack here at the port. And on the boat strikes, that continues and is yet to be resolved. And now we have much more information about where those boats were actually going, not all to the United States. The fact that that in some of these boats there were likely not hard drugs that were found that the president was claiming that there was. And of course, we were killing and assassinating people with no proof of what they were actually doing or what were on these boats. And Congress has not only not been consulted, there has been actually no actual deference to the separation of powers and the authority to actually go into any type of war. Donald Trump right now is marching us into a war with Venezuela with no authorization from the Congress. And the American public should be very clear. And what drives me and a bunch of people just absolutely nuts is that Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, of the entire House, not just Speaker of Republicans, continues to do absolutely nothing. He is the most cowardly person in the entire government for not even willing to stand up to Donald Trump to say one thing to the president about the way that he continues to sidestep the Congress. And by the way, members of his own party. It's not just Democrats that are frustrated with not getting information. It's these same Republicans who are finally starting to speak out more and more, and I hope that continues.
Congressman, there are some things that are unusual and not unusual about the CIA conducting operations in Latin America. They have a long history of covert operations in Latin America. That's not unusual. It's not unusual that the U.S. government has covert action to influence or pressure governments. It's not unusual that intelligence agencies have conducted deniable sabotage operations. What is unusual is that there is not a declared conflict in Venezuela. What is unusual is that the President of the United States invoked the Alien Enemies Act, attempted to earlier this year, citing war with Venezuela when a war with Venezuela was not actually happening. And now it seems to look like that the President of the United States is actually trying to manufacture a war with Venezuela, to backstroke, as Michael Steele would say, into justification for his invoking of the Alien Enemies Act. Help me understand Just help me understand how this is serving the American people, how this is America first, how this is focusing on the kitchen table issues. Help me understand.
There is no connection to what the American people want to what Donald Trump's actions are every single day in the public. Donald Trump should be focused on affordability, on lowering the cost of health care, on lowering the cost of rent and housing, the issues that he actually talked about in the campaign about affordability, lowering the price of groceries for American families. He's doing none of that. In fact, he's doing the opposite. He's raising prices through tariffs. And now he's marching us to a war with Venezuela. And people should be very clear. Donald Trump wants regime change in Venezuela. He wants the resources of the country. He wants to open up that exploration for God knows who and what of the multinational corporations around oil that we know Venezuela is rich with. And all of this without any sort of explanation to the American public or the Congress. I mean, we're finding out what's happening in Venezuela through reports in the press. There's no briefings that are happening, not even to Republican members of Congress. And so Donald Trump is on this thing. This is all him and his administration and an unqualified Secretary of Defense or Secretary of War or whatever the hell they're calling Pete Hegseth now. This is all on them. And so we have to be strong, and Republicans need to join us. The Speaker needs to grow some, and we all need to stand up to Donald Trump and demand there's actually accountability and there's a check and balance system with the Congress.
Nancy, I'll begin with you. The Trump administration has been using multiple levers to target all forms of immigration in this country, including de-documenting people who have been here legally, tried to do things the quote-unquote right way. And it seems their strategy is working. How were they able to accomplish all of this in basically 11 months?
Some of it is a question of the framework, which is the legal framework. Whereas police officers are accountable, particularly after the George Floyd demonstrations, accountable if they search your home without a warrant. The fruits of that can't be introduced in court. If they beat you up, you can sue them for damages. Not so with immigration officers. Not so with immigration officers. With ICE officers, if they search you illegally, the evidence can't be withheld from court, can't be suppressed in court unless the illegality was, as they say, egregious, which is a very high bar, because the Supreme Court said in 1994 that, you know, the deportations were proceeding in a regular, careful way, that abuses were not widespread. That framework is what we have today when abuses are widespread, and you can't sue them for damages as you could for a police officer. So there is really, it's almost as if we have fought post George Floyd to make police officers more accountable, more constrained, only to find that we have a completely unaccountable, unconstrained police force, ICE, in our midst.
Charles, on that accountability piece, what do you think the legacy, the impact of the rampant use of masks by this administration, the agents deployed by this administration, will be, and the impact that it's going to have over the next 3 years as this continues?
Well, Antonia, I think it has a very interesting sort of take on everything that we're watching unfold. And that is, to the last point, it really creates another barrier between the notion of the public and accountability for law enforcement in this regard. So ICE and DHS are not police. They are not law enforcement, yet we see them increasingly blurring the line between law enforcement, and it makes it more difficult to ascertain that line from an accountability standpoint when you talk about the mask and when you talk about how they're hidden. There was something that jumped out to me about your lead-in as you were talking about the entire setup that this administration has pushed with respect to their narrative. With what they are doing and who they are doing it to, they have created a space that has tacitly given them permission by the American people to go and use these sort of surreptitious, excessive grasp of power through the executive that are unheralded and unprecedented by law enforcement from the executive branch. That's not something we've seen before. And one of the reasons why is because in other situations, you would have accountability. But because of who they're targeting and how they're shaping this narrative, they are getting away with it more and more. And the large effect, the big term effect, the long term effect for this, Antonia, is that ultimately we will be in a space where the type of power that the executive branch has seized will be irreversible in order to get back.
Kim, one of the sort of hallmarks of this current era of aggressive, unusual tactics has been what advocates and families, immigrants describe as a real increase in racial profiling as part of the work to actually detain and find migrants and meet these sort of quotas set by members of the administration like Stephen Miller, who very openly pushing for sort of this impossible task of trying to get 12 to 13 million people out of this country in the next 3 years. And on that, a lot of those stops, the racial profiling, they've been dubbed Kavanaugh stops because of a previous opinion from the Supreme Court justice. But it was very interesting because in the recent decision from the Supreme Court that stops the Trump administration from deploying National Guard in Illinois, there's an interesting footnote from Justice Kavanaugh that I want to get your thoughts on. He seems to be trying to clarify previous guidance that had been interpreted as greenlighting racial profiling. And he writes in it, the basic constitutional rules governing that dispute are longstanding and clear. The Fourth Amendment requires that immigration stops must be based on reasonable suspicion of illegal presence. Stops must be brief. Arrests must be based on probable cause, and officers must not employ excessive force. He also talks and basically is trying to say that race, officers must not make interior immigration stops or arrests based on race or ethnicity. Again, as I've done this reporting, I've been out in communities and talked to people who've been part of these encounters. What you just heard the justice describe there is not how these things are unfolding on the ground. Do you think, because of the way they've been branded as essentially sort of being his fault, that Kavanaugh is trying to undo something, close a door that he already left wide open?
Well, he's definitely walking back what he wrote in a concurring opinion to one of these shadow docket rulings, these emergency rulings. The Supreme Court has been feverishly basically overruling lower courts' wait a minute injunctions, meaning let's pause. Donald Trump, you need to hold off and let's see if this complies with the law. The Supreme Court's been rushing in and letting him do what he wants and then saying, we'll deal with the major case later. In one of these cases, there was a challenge brought to racial profiling, and the government was pretty clear that it does basically detain people based on whether they're speaking Spanish, whether their English is good, what the color of their skin is, their race, whether they're hanging out in areas that tend to be places where migrants work. And the lower court said, no, this is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. You got to stop this until we take a better look at it. Supreme Court came in one of these so-called emergency orders. And I say so-called because there's no emergency really in most of these, except that Donald Trump wants to do what he wants to do now and not have to wait till later. The court let this go forward. Kavanaugh wrote a concurring opinion basically justifying the suspension, I would say, of the Fourth Amendment in this context, saying immigration's really a problem. And sure, there's some evidence of violence in this context, but that's not before the court. And publicly, that became known as the Kavanaugh stop, essentially using that concurring opinion to, I think, shine a light on what the Supreme Court's doing across a number of constitutional protections, that is, suspending them under this unitary executive theory of massive presidential power, which Charles mentioned earlier, is where we're going as a country. And I agree, in that opinion, he sort of slipped in this recent case involving the National Guard in Chicago. He kind of said, wait, I didn't really mean that. The Fourth Amendment says what it says. But Kavanaugh's, footnote is not going to lift that prior Supreme Court case that's still in place, that emergency ruling. And also, as Nancy mentioned, the Constitution's not self-executing. It doesn't have its own police force. If the Constitution's not enforced by the Supreme Court or enforced through the United States Congress against the president saying, wait, we don't like this, we're going to hold some kind of sanctions. And if the courts aren't empowered through a Supreme Court precedent to hold these officers accountable, what we have is a lawless presidency and a lawless executive branch when it comes to immigration in this moment.
So, Nancy, as it seems Justice Kavanaugh wants to put the genie back in the bottle here, do you think ICE is going to see this footnote and change their tactics?
Boy, if it seems like ICE doesn't see the Constitution, I hardly think they're gonna study the footnotes of a Supreme Court decision, directly. But part of it, again, is structural. Your opening was terrific. That when we were looking at the border and people with orders of deportation, sort of what we call targeted immigration movement, that's one thing. And then you go after people who either have an order of deportation, people at the border. But when you've expanded this to the whole country, and now you're talking about people who may have overstayed a visa, who don't have an order of deportation, may have overstayed, or even someone with a green card that you don't think they should have anymore. Now you're talking about not targeted stops, which opens the door to racial profiling, just as the LA case that was just discussed did. You open the door to racial profiling because you don't know anything else about the person. Right? You don't have a formal document, an order of deportation. You don't know anything about the person except the color of their skin and their accent. So, no, I don't think Kavanaugh can dial back what he did.
Charles, I want to get your reaction to a new filing in the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case. So a new filing revealing from a judge, Judge Crenshaw, that Garcia was prosecuted after being deported. The judge writes, quote, "The 2025 dates are pertinent because this is when the government decided to deport Abrego to El Salvador without bringing criminal charges against him. When Abrego successfully challenged his deportation to El Salvador and when the government changed its mind, returned him to the United States and initiated criminal proceedings against him." As you know, Charles, a trial was set with the government, going after and claiming that Abrego Garcia is connected to MS-13 and human smuggling. That trial that was just supposed to start in days, canceled. And now it seems a judge is considering the possibility here of vindictive prosecution. Do you think that's the direction that we're going? That can be hard to prove. But do you think in this case the facts are clear?
It can be. And I think that one of the things that stands out about his case is that in most of these conversations, Antonio, we're not talking about United States citizens. And so that's where people have been able to sort of navigate this notion of whether due process actually applies. And I think that in this instance, the notion of due process and maintaining its integrity is unquestionable. And that's why there's so much leeway for the courts to make this decision and to move in this direction, because the administration is dead to rights wrong when you look at the timeline here. And that's one of the reasons why this notion of vindictive prosecution can be on the table. In most cases, it is a very, as you've already discussed, high bar. As a former prosecutor, that was something that I could operate pretty much comfortably with as long as I was adhering to normal standards of ethics and doing things the right way. But when you lay out, as this decision has, or as this filing has, the timeline that's involved here, it paints a very interesting picture that I do think would help approach that bar. So this is a very unique circumstance in as much as it's usually not as clear or as clean, particularly in the context of this immigration discussion, but we may be able to see this play out in the realm of a vindictive prosecution moving forward.